I, 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 I got a letter from the government the other day. I opened and read it and burned that. Man, the way that I live don't concern that. Man, we gon' have to settle this another way. A letter from the government.
Welcome to another edition of Critical Insight on Your World News. I'm your host, Solomon Kamajan. And once again, it's our honor to be joined by Kali Akuno of the Malcolm X Grassroots Movement. And if you remember, about a few months back, we had Brother Kali on to discuss the 2012 report that they released in, I believe it was late June, early July, about every 36 hours a black person was killed in America by the police, law enforcement, or so-called law enforcement and security guards. And we have Kali on today to discuss a recent report to that, following up their initial report that discloses the entire calendar year of 2012. Every 28 hours now, a black person was killed by the police, a total of 313 at the very, very least by the police. And so we have Kali on again to discuss this report, to discuss the most recent report and its ramifications. And Kali, I'd like to welcome you on Critical Insight again. And just to start off by asking you if you can give folks, especially folks that may have not seen the first interview, or may have not seen your other interviews that you've done on programs like the Real News Network, may not have even heard of the report or read the report. What did the first report disclose, and why the second report? What's the difference between the first and second report?
Mm-hmm. Well, this is the third report, actually.
Oh.
Just so folks know. We did, myself and Arlene Eisen collaborated to produce the first two. And the first one came out in March. And that one highlighted that there were, at that point, more than 30 black people killed, primarily black men, between the ages of 18 and I think like 32, at that time that we were looking at. And we were putting this together right at the kind of the height, if you will, of a lot of the mass mobilization that was going on around Trayvon Martin's killing by George Zimmerman. And we were putting this together, not necessarily because of that, but we were putting it together because we had just noticed a spike at the end of 2011, 2012, and we're really following up on some initiatives that we started to pay attention to in 2008 to just bring, all the folks who are watching this up to date when MXGM put out a short piece around three brothers two were killed, one was critically injured, New Year's Eve of 2008, 2009. And what we were anticipating then and had begun monitoring was that in part because of the racist reaction to the first person of African descent being elected to the President of the United States, that there was going to be an increase in this kind of hostility towards black people, towards African people in this country. And as far as we can tell, and I'll come back to why I say that, as far as we can tell, there's definitely been a spike. And so we wanted to really highlight that. And that first report came out in March. We then followed up 3 months later as the pace just kept advancing based on the research that we were doing. And what we came up with was that there were 120 black people who had been killed primarily by the police, but some by security officers who were police primarily who were moonlighting, doing kind of private contract work. And vigilantes, if you will, many of whom were deputized to do certain services in their communities by local police forces, as it was the case with Zimmerman. So we really wanted to highlight this. We wanted to highlight it to bring it to, the black community's attention, but also the attention of the world that a major human rights crisis was occurring and that you were hearing very little about it. And there was next to nothing being done about it by the U.S. government, who has the primary responsibility to control this, since it's their operatives, if you will, their employees, who are responsible for these killings. And so we wanted to highlight this fact and bring it to everybody's attention. It's kind of a wake-up call.
Kali, can you tell us what methodology you and your colleagues and comrades at Malcolm X Grassroots Movement used to compile the data that went into all three reports?
The basic methodology was combing through the mainstream media reports about individuals who had been killed, police reports of the same individuals who had been killed, and then doing a lot of cross-referencing of their names, their race, the factors and circumstances surrounding their deaths, and doing, just kind of a cross-referencing to make sure we had as much information as was possible available. And this last one, let me tell you, the person who did the research on it and put the report fundamentally together was Cameron Arlene Eisen, who put countless hours into cross-referencing, checking all this information, making sure all the data was correct, following up with leads, parceling out information where there were some tough cases. But it was basically, those two, the police reports and the mainstream media, that we had to rely upon because, again, outside of kind of your FBI statistics, which are increasingly becoming more and more, quote-unquote, race neutral in their reportage, it's really kind of hard to ascertain a lot of this information. And it's been in their interest, really, and part of the kind of the right-wing agenda to kind of disaggregate, not do any disaggregation of information by race, etc., to kind of paint just a very distorted picture of where the main thrust of the state's attacks and aggression is. So really trying to highlight that information is a critical piece. And I think it's also, so that's the primary method. And I know some people, just to back up, some people have been asking us, they want a list of all the websites and everything. And literally that would be thousands of websites. We encourage folks to, if you want to collaborate or check the data for yourselves, by all means do. Look at the names, right. Look at the circumstances and do your research on it. And you'll find that, it's there to a T. And one of the things that you will also find is that more than likely, there are more than 313 cases. I think we talked about this earlier. But those are the ones that we could substantively validate. And we know that there are more out there, but that the way that the reporting is done primarily by the police and then how the mainstream media really just tells and copies and accepts everything pretty much the police put out without any critical questioning. You have some police departments like Philly, like Detroit, like Chicago, which make it very, very hard, extremely hard and intentionally hard to kind of gather a lot of information. So what we often have to do is kind of cross-reference when we hear it was something, an incident happened in a certain neighborhood or a certain locale, kind of cross-reference that with like census data and things of that nature to kind of get a sense, okay, who's who, what are the circumstances, what's what, to be a little bit more revealing than what the police had intended. But it brings again the question that we've been drawing out, that there has to be some, whether the movement takes this on or the state takes this on. I think both need to happen. But, there is no source right now that is compiling this information, compiling this this data. And it's critical that we have it because it will reveal the deeper natures of the police state and the nature of the repression which is taking place throughout this country. So if you look at the specific things we've, focused specifically, not exclusively, but very specifically on the African community, the Black community in this country. But we know that overlaps with, quote unquote, the Latino community in many cases, right, with Dominicans, Haitians, etc., other people from the West Indies, etc. And what we put out, we said in I think the last interview we did, we know for a fact that if you look at the casualties around some of the different things happening on the border, primarily with Mexico, and how that whole zone has been militarized. There's been all this legislation that's passed through Congress and all these executive orders, which now allows anybody within kind of 100 or 50-mile radius, I think one of the two, if you're within that radius, you can be stopped, searched, and checked without a warrant, etc. So it's some very, the nature of the repression, I think, is becoming much more acute. But because many of us aren't looking at or trying to look at it in this totality of how we're playing out. We kind of see it in isolated ways. And what we want to push is to everybody that you got to look at it in an integrated way to understand the truly repressive nature of the society and where it's going and where it's heading and what we need to do to kind of defend ourselves on a practical level to confront it and stop it.
Right, right. And speaking of oppression, when you look at, for instance, the white supremacist, capitalist, institutionally racist nature of the media in this country, and obviously that spills over to the nature of policing in the United States of America. We know that public policy oftentimes is predicated on a number of things, and some of those things have to do with the way the media portrays various things, such as crime. And your organization, named after Malcolm X, to paraphrase him, he said one time that the newspapers will have you hating the oppressed and loving the oppressor. With that being said, have you when you were just kind of fleshing through, I can only imagine thousands and thousands, probably tens of thousands of pages of newspapers and periodicals to put these three reports together. Did you find that there was a common thread where the media, these newspapers were I guess the best way to say it, were casting doubt over the victims, and they were giving they were basically giving benefit of the doubt to the police officers? And then the second part of that question, when you were looking through that, did you find anything about how the police officers justified their excessive force in relationship to these extrajudicial murders and killings that they conducted?
Right. Good question. Glad you asked. I would say 99.9% of the media coverage just tailors, what the police reports issue to the media and what the circumstances are. That's the lead. That's the kind of the ground cover. Where there's some questions or things of doubt, it usually comes from a family member who they've interviewed, who will raise a point about this not being just. They want information. Some of the facts don't add up. My son or daughter, is not involved in certain types of activities. And then the media will say, well, there's community members who want answers or who raise certain questions. And that's it. They believe that that's kind of a balanced coverage or balanced information. And rarely, if ever, did we encounter in any of these three reports, a real effort by these kind of beat journalists to do their own independent investigation. So it's just really whatever the police put out, give me your facts release. I'm going to just tailor out, maybe get one or two other quotes from somebody else to make it look more objective and neutral. How the mainstream media and how we're all taught in journalism, those of us who going through those kind of courses, or even taught in your basic English classes, be objective, and that's what they consider objectivity. Rarely is anything presented from the Black community's perspective around, why are there so many stops and frisks in our neighborhood? Why is my neighborhood designated a high crime area or a high drug trafficking area? When anyone who knows anything about drug consumption in the United States knows that that is primarily concentrated in the white community, always has, and more than likely, unless there's some major demographic shifts, always will be. Right. But our communities are policed and targeted in a very specific manner, which is completely out of proportion to the reality of that's what they're trying to do, is confront drug use, drug sales, and drug, the promotion of the paraphernalia and targeting activities, supposedly criminal activities that go with it. It's totally out of proportion to what the reality is of both use and then distribution in this country. So the targeted ways and the targeted policies and the laws that are unbalanced, like the cocaine to crack disparity, are very much rooted in white supremacy, very much rooted in the unequal order of this society, and who is easy to criminalize, who is easy to target without causing too much of a commotion, too much of a ruckus. But the main thing that, we, in this report, I think the tables in particular that will come up. I want to draw everybody's attention to really look at the categorization that is there and the information that is there and how we try to break it out. And I think get this new one. Arlene added a couple of different things if you look at it from the first two reports to the third one that I think were very helpful. And for us to kind of think further about this is taking the information apart that's presented to us by the police and then putting a critical historical lens, shaped and fashioned by our community and our experience to be like, okay, y'all lying. We know it, policing don't go down like this. We know not everybody has a weapon. We know that you can't claim someone as being aggressive but then shoot them in the back. It's just too much things that you can just tease out of even their information. Yeah. To know that, I would say roughly 90% of these are just straight up, cover-ups for for the policies and practices that they're pursuing and just how they're trained. They say it this way, don't say it that way, and you'll be covered. And should the stories not add up, don't worry about it. We have, the mayor more than likely will get our back. If not the mayor, then the courts will get our back. So, they're under no real pressure or threat, save for what we organize as a community and put on them to be accountable in some particular form or fashion. So, but it's critical to take for folks to understand how this information is used by our enemies to justify their policies, to justify the repression. And that's a key thing that we're trying to counter with these reports, because they're going to try to use what we've seen, particularly since September 11th. They will use every little incident to their advantage if we let them to come up with more repressive measures, at every turn. So, we've been doing this interview post the incidences in Boston. And you're already here, even there, despite whatever happened, if, we got to raise serious questions about this case if it's not one of these more elaborate FBI entrapment scenarios going crazy, which it may well be. We have to hear that out. But regardless of whether it's something they set up or not, the response is already tight in the news. We need to spy on more Arabs and Muslims. It's coming out the mouths of the Republicans and some Democrats and, spy completely, even more so than they've been doing already since September 11th. They need to come up with more surveillance programs and drones and things of that nature, that they want to put into the equation. And on and on and on, labeling people as enemy combatants or labeling as terrorists, not having, their Miranda rights and people, praising this and thinking it's justified. So these are some things that we definitely have to pay attention to because people are being conditioned. I mean, that's the critical thing. What happened in Boston, this whole siege, if you accept that, then you accepting, the fundamental premise of a police state and how this whole thing has been built out, rolled out. And those are some of the things we've been trying to draw attention to, that this whole militarization of the so-called domestic space within the United States, it's been going on for 40 years. It took a major turn in the 90s. But, you now have little armies in every single major urban city where the police operate basically with impunity like they do in Iraq or Afghanistan, and using the same toys and the same weapons and the same strategies and tactics of counterinsurgency and containment on Black and brown communities. So it's very critical that we try to look at all this in a complete perspective and use the information as tools in our organizing to fight back against what they're trying to push.
Right. Thank you. And this report, this most recent report they released within the last 2 weeks, Operation Ghetto Storm. I can remember the first time that we interviewed you a few months ago. A lot of the well, not a lot, but all of the corporate media in the U.S. had virtually ignored it, suppressed it, if you will, and also the so-called progressive media. A lot of the folks who had been considered progressive media weren't picking up this story. With this particular report, has the media coverage, has it increased, has it decreased, has it pretty much been a status quo?
It's pretty much been the status quo. And in point of fact, to this point, as you pointed out, it's only been publicly released for a little bit more than I think 2 weeks now. It's hardly gotten any coverage. I mean, I think the piece that the Real News Network has done, the piece that was on Black Agenda Report, and a couple of blogs that has been on, like Ranya's and some other folks, that's really the extent to which it's received any kind of noted coverage at this point. And it's not because we haven't reached out to the progressive or the mainstream capitalist media. We've reached out to them several different times, and there's largely been kind of either a more of the same attitude or a total disregard for the report and its findings, altogether. And quite honestly, it's not something that, at least to myself, that I find that surprising. Because the reality of it is the silence, again, speaks to the lack of value that African life, that Black life has in this country. And that's, I think, pretty much across the board. Even a lot of Black outlets that you would think would pick up something like this have also kind of ignored it. Some because I think they fear what the implications might mean for the Obama administration, and many of them are still trying to defend him against the kind of the racist criticism that he is coming under, but also not trying to rock the boat in terms of really challenging his politics and his policies that he's been putting out. So we're not that surprised, but we're going to keep plugging along because the information has to get out there. We encourage everybody who is watching your show or some of the others that have picked us up to download the report. And more importantly, spread it word of mouth. I mean, we got to just use the tried and true that we know in the Black community is, word of mouth and hand to hand is often the most reliable way we get information anyway. It's not filtered or distorted, particularly by mainstream media and its biases against African people.
Right. I appreciate that. I've heard you speak before, very eloquently and in a very detailed manner, connecting the dots between racism, white supremacy, capitalism, and you just mentioned the capitalist mainstream media in this country. When we talk about that, can you talk about the underground economy, which you've discussed before? And because you have some folks that will come out and say, "Hey, Kali, well, why don't you put out a report about the structural violence that happens within Black and brown communities, the so-called black and black violence, brown and brown violence. Why don't you discuss that? Right. Cities like Chicago. What's your response to that? And how do you connect that to capitalism and the underground economy, which you've discussed before?
Number one, we always try to point out that the two are intimately linked. That the violence that you see, intercommunal violence that you see, particularly in the Black community, is very much tied to the underground economy. It's very much tied to competition over kind of corner markets, if you will, small-time markets, if you will, and the intensity of controlling the drug trade, the sex trade, the trade in illicit goods, other goods and services that are part of the underground economy. And how they're linked is directly through the government structuring of these economies. And why do I say that? If we look at particularly the drug markets and the drug game, if you will, that is an international circuit of capital that we are intimately tied to. And if you just take primarily the dominant product on that market, which is cocaine, be it in its raw form or its powder form or its kind of crack form, you got to recognize how the corner blocks in Chicago are tied to the economies of the Andean region. to Colombia, to Peru, to Bolivia, to Ecuador, and the coca that's being produced there, the nature of which the United States government is financing campaigns and wars, counter-revolutionary wars in all those countries, how they use Colombia as a kind of a primary bulwark or security guard, if you will, similar to the role that Israel plays over in Southwest Asia, where they arm it to the teeth. They've been sponsoring and facilitating what they call a counter-insurgency war against left forces there that have also, in some respects, deeply got involved in this economy because of how lucrative it is. And if you look at all the violence that's taking place in Mexico, which is the main hub by which cocaine is introduced now, that is we are directly tied to that, whether we're in Los Angeles, Chicago, New York, Boston, Atlanta, wherever, we're linked into that circuit of capital. And because how the drug war is structured, not only within the United States, but internationally, violence is part and parcel of the game. It's part and parcel of how the whole economy is both mediated and regulated. And because the United States government, for a number of different reasons, refuses to acknowledge that the drug war is a complete and utter failure, but it also, I think we have to keep in mind, it's better for business to have a perpetual war than it is to resolve a conflict. So that's something we also got to keep in mind as part of the calculus. But it's not something that I would argue. Let me put it this way: I would argue that if you look at mass incarceration and if you look at the casualties of the drug war, it's doing what it was designed to do, which is destabilize entire communities and nations throughout the globe and to keep certain forces and the ruling class in power. So in that regard, it's very successful. As regards to our lives, it's doing the damage to keep us divided, to keep us fragmented. And I think that's part of the objective that we really need to highlight and focus on. So what we always say, and what you can see in the more so in this report in Operation Ghetto Storm, we really tried to make that much more explicit than it was in the first two reports. But we also, within the Let Your Model Be Resistance, tried to address that in this question of how do we deal with intercommunal violence by pointing out the links and encouraging folks not to take kind of a static view, but to take a more comprehensive and a global view on this question and see how and understand how we are linked, and ultimately how we're going to have to fight back, to stop this type of destabilization and containment that's being visited amongst us, because it's not going to be solved purely within the U.S. context. This is something that we're going to have to analyze, organize with on an international basis with folks throughout Latin America.
Brother Kali, can you continue to expound upon what you were talking about in regards to the underground economy and how the structures of capitalism, force folks to turn to this underground economy because there's no jobs whatsoever within their communities, and we find that most of these communities that are riddled with unemployment and a lack of opportunity happen to be communities that are predominantly black and brown.
That's right. That's right. So yeah, just continuing, I think the critical thing is that we have to really look at, examine, and study, and it's very relevant to our campaign work around drug policy, changing some of the drug laws, the disparities in sentencing between powder cocaine and crack cocaine, that we are tied to an international circuit of capital, very much controlled by the United States government. We look at the drug game, in particular, and cocaine as one circuit of it, which has its primary root and base starting in the Andean region, and how much that is a central part of the economy in places like Ecuador, Colombia, Peru, Bolivia, and now increasingly in Mexico, with the cartels there and all the violence that's been going on there. And you bring that same dynamic from the same type of disarticulated economy that operates on a global scale, and you put that in the communities of Atlanta, you put that right hard in the black community of Chicago, New York, Detroit, Boston, Baltimore, D.C., you name it, right? We are directly tied to each other in a very symbiotic and often kind of a parasitic relationship to each other. So we have to kind of put that in mind when we're thinking about, well, how do we really address both this issue of kind of mass incarceration, the extrajudicial killings that are part of the whole militarization and aggressive and occupation of black and brown communities by the police throughout the country, and how do we deal with the issues of racial profiling. Many people always want to kind of put this, we can just come up with these kind of local solutions, and until you deal with the economic root, you're not going to deal with the fundamental basis of why there is so much violence in the black community, why there is so much violence in Mexico, why there is so much violence in Colombia, Peru, and the Andean region. All three of us are, all those, that's just one circuit. There are others, going to heroin or going to, marijuana. There's all different types of circuits that a lot of our people, because of the very unemployment and the structural, I would call it displacement that black people face in this country, particularly in the economic realm, have been confronting really since the end of the 1960s. Working in the underground economy is one way or another. Either people are permanently in that wing, growing numbers of our people, or some we all to a certain extent are trying to make ends meet by engaging some aspect of that economy. It could be from just barter with your neighbors or your friends or your family, or getting goods and services, gratis and in exchange. Watch my kids, I watch yours. All these are things that are part of this kind of this cycle and circuit of capital. It's hard to kind of trace, but it's very real in our lives and has an impact, and it has a very definite impact in terms of the intracommunal, the black-on-black violence that we see, and they're directly related. Right. That's the main point that we really want to bring home to folks who want to kind of throw out, well, how can you, these numbers pale in comparison to what's going on, say in Chicago, per se. And if you look at them in isolation, that's true. But if you look at them in directly connected, you find that overall, and what we've been trying to point out is that, this is a systematic assault on black life in this country. And the extrajudicial killing is one particular component of it, and it's an egregious component of it that is, the hand of the state is clear, right? It's not in the background with letting, drug shipments come through or gun shipments come through, or it's very direct and it's very clear, and we got to give it focus because it helps us to understand the overall character of the nature of the assault that's against our people.
That's right. And looking at the within the flesh and the meat of this extensive report, can you tell us what is the largest age demographic of Africans who were killed by these police or so-called law enforcement?
Those in their prime, the young. Mm-hmm. Basically, roughly, but I would say that the vast majority between the ages of 18 and 30. Some of our most productive physical years. The years that one would think in a more humane society and economy, that people will be putting in quality work, kind of refining their educational skills and enhancing, getting out and exploring the world, learning themselves, starting to become more concrete contributors to the economy and to the society, becoming parents. But people who should have, in our quote-unquote modern society, should have, 40 to 50 productive years of their life ahead of them. Yeah. And that's being snatched and being stolen. And that has a profound impact on what the future of our communities are going to look like. If you take that many young men and women, either off the street because they're incarcerated or you just outright killed them, that's going to have a profound impact on the generations, coming behind us. And that's one of the things also is the message we've been trying to get out, is for folks to really look at, what is the future going to entail with this pace of assault against our people.
And Kali, the next question I'd like to ask you is, can you talk about what percentage of the cases excessive force was used? Because I know that's documented within the report. It details like, I think it was something like 86% of the cases were excessive. Can you expound upon that?
Well, again, I want to bring folks back to the methodology. And what we were really trying to bring out of that is, even in their own reports, the extent of the violence. Let's just break it down to that. The violence that they were willing to mete out in all of these cases. And so how are they being trained? Who's supervising that? How is enough enough? Yeah. But what you clearly see is that, people want to, who may be detractors against the information that's compiled, detractors against the report, detractors against the analysis. The critical piece around that figure and those statistics in general is that, it shows a very clear pattern. Right. That this is not just isolated, these methods, right, these strategies and tactics that they're using for the policing of our communities, they're not isolated. It's not like the people in Seattle are getting necessarily a different training than the people in Atlanta. The police officers in Atlanta or those in Boston are getting a different orientation than those in Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. Because people want to point to this fragmented, each kind of police department is a little bit different, or the context is a little bit different, or they get trained in different ways, and some are more accountable, or then there's good cops and there's bad cops. And we really wanted to bring home, it's like, okay, well, in the quantifiable world that we live in, if numbers don't lie, how do you justify that if across the board, in every single state, and in every place where our people are concentrated, particularly in these urban and suburban areas, we see the same practices, the same approach, and the same results? Death, just straight up death, or mass incarceration, or racial profiling, or stop and frisk by many various names, that lead to all of these types of incidences. How do you explain that? Right. So you can't, it defeats this whole argument. You can't say, well, these are just kind of individual or it's random. Like, no, this is very systematic. It's intentional, and it's part of the not only the policy, but the very fabric of the kind of mindset and orientation around social control that's being, visited upon our people.
Right. And one of the things I really like about this report, as well as the last report, is that it was very solutions oriented. But this report has almost an addendum, has something that is a report within a report. It's the actual guide. It's the handbook, for self-defense. Can you talk about what this is and why you see this guide for self-defense a critical component within this report?
Yeah, the Let Your Motto Be Resistance, a handbook that was put together by myself and some other comrades within the Malcolm X Grassroots Movement. We really wanted to be proactive. There's a common pattern that you see in our communities as well. One of our loved ones is killed, snuffed out in cold blood by the police, often for doing absolutely nothing, just being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And then there's a common pattern of us kind of resorting to protests, demanding answers, demanding, typically from a lot of the families, I just want to know what happened. At most, there's no criminal prosecution of the police at all, no investigation. They're kind of just taking off duty for a little bit, putting on a desk job for a couple of months. Then they're right back on the street. Then people have to resort to civil lawsuits. About half the time people win something, in terms of some kind of financial remuneration. But meanwhile, 300 of our people plus are systematically being hunted and killed. So how do we be proactive in changing how policing is done in our communities? How can we be proactive in addressing the intercommunal violence in our communities? Because we don't think it's enough. And part of this pattern, of just kind of waiting for a protest or waiting for something to happen and then kind of mobilizing, it's really too late. After the fact, it's too late. And we got to do things that, if we know the figures are as high as this every year, and we believe that they are, because I say that belief because there is no, the FBI and the U.S. government doesn't keep records like this, and they don't do so deliberately. But we have to step up our role in reorganizing our communities to be able to defend ourselves and be able to, beat back the repression that's being, meted out to us by the government and many other forces. And, our ultimate objective is to see Black and oppressed communities organized in this country to be able to exercise self-determination. I mean, that's what we're pushing for. But we got to start where we are and start with the reality that we're dealing with. And the more that we are organized, and that's really what that Let Your Motto really pushes, is that, we got to start on our own blocks and our own communities and really, get to know our neighbors, get to know what their interests are, where their politics lie, what level of role they're willing to play in terms of, securing each other's back, and just watching out for each other and watching out for our kids. It's not new. These are the things that are really in that report, quite frankly, are tried and true methods that our communities used to practice extensively, particularly in the South. So it was just really kind of refashioning that and representing a lot of that to a younger generation and saying, we've done this in the past. We can do it again. The know-how is there. In many respects, particularly if you go to some of the older generations. So it's not something that's alien to us. We can do it, but it's just going to take the will and resolve to get out there and start doing the organizing. And from there, build our capacity, community by community, to be able to ward this off. And once we're organized, we can more systematically deal with stop and frisk or these gang injunctions or things that are more internal. How do we deal with, the underground economy, in all its various aspects, with an understanding and being humane that people got to eat. Yeah. So, we got to start tackling more economic questions that are plaguing our communities from, unemployment, homelessness, joblessness, foreclosed homes, all those things that are plaguing us. If we are organized, we are in a much stronger and more sound position to deal with all of the different ills that confront us. So the self-defense is really one of many starting places that we really wanted to just, put out. But the other piece to it is that we see this, as the U.S. economy continues to tank, and that's what it's doing. The folks shouldn't have no illusions about whatever Wall Street is doing. Yeah. They can make profits without employing people these days, and that's really what the name of the game is. That kind of paper economy is not tied to the real economy. The real economy, one of the last reports that came out, where it was like 88,000 jobs were created. Yeah. Supposedly, who knows oftentimes what that means. But what it really spoke to was that roughly a couple of million people just have stopped showing up, to the unemployment offices saying, I'm looking for work, because they know ain't nothing there.
That's right.
But, we got to tackle that. And I think start with the difficult challenge of, how do we reorganize in our communities to, meet our own needs, and how do we fight against the repressive forces of both, the corporations and capital and the state to, eliminate its grip and control over the resources that we all need to survive. So, but we wanted to speak to this emergency and give us some urgency. So these two pieces were put together to work in that fashion, to be solution oriented with some long-term objectives in mind. The piece around Operation Ghetto Storm provides both some, we try to provide concrete material analysis and statistical breakdown, so people are armed with certain kind of facts. Put some analysis to it that reinforces and supports the organizing piece. And there's one more piece that we're going to come out with in May, which is really for teachers, primarily on the high school and in the college level. But we think there's some material that everybody there can use, for primary education as well. That's called We Charge Genocide Again. So these three pieces we really want to push and move in tandem with as kind of a guide, for the next couple of years that we hope Black communities, Latino communities, oppressed communities throughout the U.S. empire would pick up and use, whether there's somebody from MXG there to kind of work with a collaborator or not. That's not necessarily the point. The point is we need to get organized.
And my last question, I thank you so much for taking the time for this in-depth interview with us. My last question for you, Brother Kali, is almost a two-pronged question. I'm thinking totally out loud. And as I hear you explain different aspects of the report, I'm just simply thinking that I think it'd be vastly important for community centers, mosques, churches, black churches, to have folks come to actually, break down this report and I would say even more importantly, break down the component of the report that you just kind of elaborated on, and that's what communities can do in terms of reorganizing themselves, coming together, developing, vertical economies, that are based on a lot of things that you mentioned earlier in the interview. Folks, earning money, looking after other folks' kids and so forth. What are the next steps that people can take? People that I undoubtedly are thinking out loud right now, saying, "Man, I need to get a hold of this. Where can they go to get a hold of this report, get more information about it?" And also, a question I'd like to ask you is that are members of Malcolm X Grassroots Movement, including yourself, are you guys available to come to community centers, black churches, mosques, and so forth to actually break down colleges, universities, schools to break down this report and actually to do workshops in terms of how we can actually tangibly reorganize ourselves as a community to kind of ward off everything from white supremacy, institutional racism, capitalism, and so forth?
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for that question, number one. I think it helps us to promote the organizing that we were talking about. First and foremost, people can get the report at the Malcolm X Grassroots Movement website, which is www.mxgm.org. Currently, the Operation Ghetto Storm and Let Your Model Be Resistance are both up there for a free download. So, download them, read them. It's a lot of paper. They're long. We understand that, but we think we wanted to give them the due attention that both these subjects needed. So we definitely encourage folks to read every single word, not just kind of glance over, go on over in some detail and share it. That's a practical thing, pass it along. If you got questions, you got difference with it, that's fine. If you want to share those with us, we are still looking to learn. We have by no means have any monopoly on knowledge around how to do this whatsoever. But we just put out some perspective and some concern in trying to, put a fire under our own feet to move on this question. And in regards to people doing trainings and being available for trainings, absolutely. Myself and many other members in different chapters throughout the country are preparing to really do a lot of training around this in the spring, in various communities, and looking to work with a number of different organizations in the Black Left Unity Network, the African Anti-War Front, etc., to doing some joint tandem to, go into our communities, be it a church of 500 or a gathering of 5 people, from the community. The size doesn't really matter, but to really kind of go through this systematically, and share what information, knowledge, perspective that we have from the experience that our organization has gained, particularly over the last 30 plus years, on how to deal with some of these questions and what lessons we have learned from, trying to apply some of the stuff in Los Angeles, around some of the gang truths, or here in Atlanta where I'm currently based, with some of the elders who've been here a long time have tried to, create kind of community, dispute mechanisms and ways of solving internal contradictions and issues within the community. So there's a lot of experience that we could really touch on and share, that we want to share, to spread this out and have it be a movement, not something that's intellectual property of, our little organization, but something that people take up and practice and put in a place that it moves us all forward to liberation.
I appreciate that. I appreciate your time, and I look forward to having you back on in May to break down the next report that's coming out, because I'm really looking forward to looking at that, and I think that's highly instructive and right on time, and it's something that's critical. And so I thank you and the rest of your comrades, the young men and women who are associated with Malcolm X Grassroots Movement, as somebody that's with Your World News, I can tell you unequivocally that we are in complete solidarity with the work that you're doing with Malcolm X Grassroots Movements, and anything that we can do pressing forward, let us know. And I hope people that are watching right now, please, get a hold of this report and start to spread it, send it through your emails, download it as an attachment and send it out to everybody in your network, not just on Facebook, but throughout your email networks, and put in the subject header, critical report, 313 black people killed in 2012, and I think that should be enough for people to delve into that report, and if they do, I think it's a step in the right direction. So thank you so much. That's Kali Akuno of the Malcolm X Grassroots Movement. I'm Solomon Kamajan for Your World News. You've been watching Critical Insights. Peace.
That's right, we're on East 229th here in the Wakefield section of the Bronx. Behind me, friends and family are gathered in front of the home that was that of Ramarley Graham. There are candles set up. The family and friends are still mourning 48 hours, and today, this afternoon, we finally got a look at the images of what exactly happened. The surveillance video is dramatic and telling. At 3 p.m. Thursday, 18-year-old Ramarley Graham can be seen walking into his home on East 229th in the Bronx. The NYPD rushes in seconds later without a search warrant and try to gain entry.
And he's kicking the door because the door is locked. They came in with their gun drawn.
According to a resident who was inside during the forced entry,
they did not screen police.
And there is no sign of a search warrant. The surveillance video is high grade. Its clarity, that of a professional. Clearly, the officers are seen desperately trying to break into the house through the front door. The damage evident once we got our cameras inside. The video also shows the NYPD entering through the back and then unlocking the front door. Once in, the race upstairs to Graham is on. And moments later, boom, boom, is all Paulette Minzy heard. In her bathroom and barely dressed, she suddenly had a gun in her face. Minzy then put her hands up and screams,
"I'm the landlord, I'm the landlord."
Minzy said the NYPD then searched her home. They found no gun. On the second floor, an unarmed Ramarley Graham was dead. After everything that's happened and the death of the young boy, how do you trust police?
I can't trust them. I'm scared of them. Right now, I'm scared of my life because I don't know what they will do. Because, I don't know what they do, and if they saw me, I'm so scared.
Do you think they're doing their job?
No, they're not. They're not doing their job. They're not doing their job. They're cruel. They're very cruel, and I'm scared of my life because if the cops come and put the gun in my face, I'm so scared.
And she's not the only one that is afraid. There are many people in this community who are on edge as well. We just had moments ago a car drive by here, and the drivers inside were actually cursing out the NYPD. This morning in Harlem, Reverend Al Sharpton had a gathering. He said that he is not anti-police, nor is the entire community. They are against officers getting gunned down. They are also against unarmed teenagers getting gunned down. Reporting from the Wakefield section of the Bronx, Mario Diaz, Pix 11 News. Kaidi?
Thank you, Mario. The shooting of Ramarley Graham has police brutality watchdog groups stirred up. They say this most recent incident is just the latest in a string of tragic events that have been caused by what they call a policy of overstepping boundaries. Activists are calling on the mayor to re-examine police operations.
Mayor Bloomberg now. Is this brother here who was beat by a police officer and thrown on his face right here in the Bronx too a few days ago? No weapon, no gun, no knife for a bag of marijuana.
They say the Graham incident did not have to lead to a death.
I got a letter from the government the other day. I opened and read it and burned that. Man, the way that I live don't concern that. Man, we gon' have to settle this another way. A letter from the government the other day.